to open with a quatrain by Yeats, which I think is appropriate to this solstice. We who still labor by the cromlech on the shore, the gray cairn on the hill, when day sinks drowned in dew, being weary of the world's empires, bow to you, master of the still stars and of the flaming door. This is the third solstice celebration for me here, and the eighth since I learned how to do these things. And very often a gift of life comes to a person, and then we realize the significance of a celebration and its resonance still unimpaired, regardless of what empires rise and fall. And in order to ascertain whether one is capable of rendering an offering on such an occasion, the time-honored truth is to have a dream, which I had last night, which I will begin with today, to give you the credentials for being able to present what I will present today. I have, incidentally, brought one of my degrees to display and parade. Many times our masters and mentors give us certain types of degrees, and I have some very exotic degrees for which there are not even names in English. But one of the degrees I prize most highly was one given me by my students. After 5 years of teaching in Canada, they presented this to me as a token of what they had received for 5 years. They had made it themselves, and the hand was on a temple door in Thailand, and one had to grasp the mudra of peace and turn it in order to enter into the temple. And they thought that this was an appropriate symbol for what they had been given. Last night I dreamed that I was in a very large structure, a very large building of enormous complications as structures have become in our time. I was not aware that it was an enormous building, but rather thought at first that it was a succession of landscapes and sets for psychological, mythological drama. I had come back from the future to a time in the past, and in coming back, I had arrived at an art museum, which was undone, yet to be finished and completed, and I alone seemed to be able to recognize in the nascent structure what it would become fulfilled in the future. And in talking with the then curator of this nascent museum, I realized that there were only certain things that could be said and given, certain hints and clues, and I would have to return to the future. So in the dream, as I prepared to return, talking with the curator of the museum, there suddenly appeared in a tree-like structure, which I soon realized was part of a forest-like setting, a chimerical creature which was half squirrel and half man, acting in a very peculiar fashion, in sort of a drunken fashion, leaning and lolling from branch to branch and slithering down the tree. And a certain kind of anxiety tone seemed to exude from this creature. In fact, the kind of an anxiety tone that would invite striking the creature, pushing it away. And in fact, it seemed to encourage this kind of an operation. And when I would not respond, would not pick up pieces of wood that were laying around and hit this creature, it brought a handful of various sizes to me to see which I would pick to strike it. And as I moved away, watching it all the time, it grew more and more man-like and less a chimera, until I noticed, lying on the forest floor slope, an iron rod, which I picked up, and as soon as I held up in this manner, the creature prepared itself to be struck and lay on the ground, mouth open already to yell in agony and encouragement for this action. Instead, I took a pinch of the earth and placed it in the mouth, and it turned to tobacco, as if I had stuffed a calumet or a sacred pipe, and then backed away and dropped the rod to the floor. And as I did so, the entire dream structure dissolved, and I woke perfectly conscious. These great triads of power tempt us to feed energy into their structure to create further manifestation. And if we refuse, it resolves into a polarity. And if the penetrating sight of the love vibration with wisdom is given out from us to arc over the distance between the two remaining poles, a new structure of three, a holy triad, comes into being, and the curse is dissolved, the anxiety dissipated, and sacredness reigns in the world. Our ancestors, tens of thousands of years ago, expressed in the trilithon the principle of the divine triad, and the cross piece on the lintel is the bridging of love and wisdom together to hold the two pillars of the great polarities of the world together. Not in a triangle that would trap, but in a portal through which man's aspiration may move truly and safely home. Those great polarities are best expressed in nature by the sun and the moon. And in ancient Celtic lore, in the mysteries, it was really the moon, the full moon, that was the doorway through which man's aspiration and learning must first pass, that he became blessed through this portal and twice blessed through this lunar portal. And if he were able, thrice blessed through the sun, because the sun's portal finally yields into the largest universal openings of all, the realm of the stars. So it was the building of the great trilithons and the organizing of the trilithons together into the earliest observatories and astronomical calculation instruments that man's relationship with the sun was not merely one of pagan, simple worship, but one of complex, sacred involvement, and the fruit of the veracity of his understanding and movement gave him the right to order the world to produce nourishment for himself and his kind so that they may live and exist. So that the food of the earth, the nutrition, is bridged by man's understanding to the root source of all life. So man stands between heaven and earth, not in a simple way, but in a sacred way. And by braiding the two together, the rhythms of the sun and the moon, the rhythms of the earth and heaven, finally hanging on to the staff of truth, it will in its fullness blossom forth And that blossoming is the celebration of the summer solstice on an annual basis. The winter solstice is a ceremony whereby the roots, the contraction of life, are tended to, are made sacred, are determined to be growing and viable. And at the other end of the great annual cycle, it's the fullness and the expansion at the time of the summer solstice that yields the fruit of the dedication at the winter solstice, which is a birth, and the summer solstice, the flowering. These realizations were a normal, almost ordinary part of the intelligence of the English-speaking world in Elizabethan times. The Globe Theater, where most of the great so-called Shakespearean plays were produced, had a complete Renaissance zodiac on the ceiling of it, so that while the audience saw the stage and the actors and the play took place under the circulation of the zodiac, secretly and yet there. And so too, the arrangement of the zodiac upon the person of the human being symbolized and signified in the deepest level the circulation of the light of wisdom in the human person through the medium of the zodiac. And it was the achievement by heroic understanding coupled with the wonderful qualities of life understanding that allowed man to take his human circulation of universal truth to the realm of the stars through the portals of the trilithon, the moon, and the sun. And of course, the great tradition is reflected in all of the great mystery religions of the world. We have in our parking lot an Egyptian statue kneeling toward the sunrise, and the inscription on the back for all to read honors that which is behind the face of the sun, which you are also. This realization, carrying over, became, in Celtic times, the province and privilege of one of the three great levels of the Celtic world. We had the students, and then we had the druids, who were the priests, and then we had the bards, who were the poets, the singers, the seers. In ancient times, the bard would stand behind the druid, behind the priest, much like the sun stands behind the trilithon. And while the druid, the priest, was in charge of orchestrating and organizing the ritual aspects of the celebration, its efficacy depended upon the integrity of the bard to have his spiritual vision intact, to convey through himself onto the motions of the druid, and from there onto the motions of the understanding of the students, an unbroken continuum of blessing. And the epitome of this bringing forth of the blessings of the sun was done at the summer solstice. And Midsummer Night's Eve, of course, was one of the great occasions. This bringing together of what had been polar opposites into a unity was best expressed in Elizabethan times as the mystical marriage, the hieros gamos. And in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Eve, we have again and again, on all different levels, the bringing together into marriages, There are two that are miscarriages of marriage. One, the simple buffoon play in Pyramus and Thisbe. One, the buffoonery initiated by Puck with Titania and Bottom. But then at the end of the play, all three levels, the elementals, the ordinary persons, and the nobility, are all brought together in triple marriages, thrice blessed levels of meeting. And it's interesting that two of the fairies who are present with Titania and Bottom are named for the two polar qualities not yet reconciled. One is called mustard seed, and the other is called blossom. So that we have the polarities of contraction and expansion, but in the meeting of Titania and Bottom, because it's a farce, doesn't quite bring off together. But later in the play, when the triple marriages are had, and the dying embers of the royal fire are lighting up the glow, in this shadowy world of embers and shadows, which would have been, in an unresolved situation, an image of hell, become instead transformed into an image of peaceful home life, ready for sleep and refreshment. And the great cycle is that during the conscious day, we have our being in the physical world, and at night we have our being in the spiritual world, in this alternation of day and night, of the physical and the spiritual, are part of the process of the alternating of opposites. And as long as they are held together and ordered together, the world will give fructification for man to continue. The most famous bard, probably by name in our time, was that of Merlin. And the old Celtic spelling of his name was M-E-R-D-D-I-N. Mer means sea, and Din meant dweller. So that there was not just one Merlin, but there were many Merlins, as an office of the highest bardic incarnation. And it meant the sea dwellers, the dwellers in the sea, going back entirely to Atlantean times. And in post-Atlantean times, the two great halves of the tradition left just in thin parentheses upon the remaining landscape. One part was in Ireland, and the other part in the New World, North America. And so there is a complement between the Meriden bardic orchestrator of the sacred mysteries in the old Celtic Irish traditions, along with the shaman of the North American Indians. And we find, in fact, not only parallels, but between the two traditions, the arcs fit together and come together like two hands into a unity. And the mystical understanding of both those traditions forms a wholeness which reconstructs for us a wisdom which was integral 20 or 30,000 years ago. One of the keys in this celebration, in this realization, comes from simple natural astronomy. This alternating of day and night, this seasonal and daily diurnal motion, has a point where all three qualities are held together for an instant. And that instant is dawn and sunset. And the sign at dawn and sunset invariably is the rising of a star. Venus or Mercury. And those two were twins in the old mystery tradition. And Venus and Mercury held the keys, symbolized in themselves, to this moment of transmutation between the day and the night, between the various levels. And we find that in the mythology of the American Indians, that actually Morning Star has a twin. And in Algonquin language, the one was called Morning Star, or Tail Feathers Woman, and the other Scarface. And it's the interpenetration of these two myths, of Morning Star, Tail Feathers Woman, and Scarface, that form the unity of understanding that produced the great Summer Solstice celebration for the North American Indians, known as the Sundance. And it's very similar to the old Celtic mysteries. Now this afternoon we're going to see a 90-minute film made by and in connection with the Blackfoot Indians themselves in Canada. And I would like to give you just a little bit of the story of Scarface and Tail Feathers Woman in the context of what I've said about Celtic mysteries, so that when you see the film this afternoon, you're seeing some of the full amplification that is displayed before you. Scarface was a young man who had fallen in love and wished to marry. He wished to come into this relationship of the mystic marriage, the Hyros Gamos. But he could not because of his disfiguration. We all have a scar of some form or other. It is not that the scar is a detraction, but the scar itself is a wound whose healing is implicit in the nature of the wound itself, and whose curing is a resolution of the entirety of the situation that had allowed it to be seen as a scar in the first place. In the old Celtic tradition, the eye of man was such a scar. And the eye being purified to be able to see by light so that the spiritual world was visible to him in an act of seeing was the healing of the scar of the material eye. So too in the myth of Scarface. Here it is. I've written it down so that I could tell it in a reasonable length of time. In that far back time, a very poor young man who had upon his face a deep scar asked a very beautiful girl to marry him. She laughed at him, made fun of him, and replied that when he removed the scar from his face, she would do as he asked. Scarface left camp, wandered far in quest of some way to remove his disfigurement. He met, one after another, many animals and asked them to help him, but always they referred him to some other animal farther on, who they said might have the power to efface the scar. So traveling, he came at last to the shore of a great lake. So large was it that if there was land on its other side, he could not see it. He had now met all the animals, had obtained no help from them, and so discouraged lay down at the edge of the water to die. Then came two swans swimming near the shore. They asked him what the trouble was. He told them, and they said that far, far out on the lake, out of sight from the land, was an island on which the sun had his home. And they believed that the sun, being all-powerful, could remove the scar. Anyway, the swan said that they would be guides for him in their graceful configuration if he would have courage to go out of sight of land onto the lake and search for the island of the sun. As the swans told him to do, he lay down upon their backs, and they bore him out away from terra firma onto the great waters. He landed, and at once, when they found this island, this handsome young man who told them that his name was Early Riser, and that the sun was his father, and Nightlight was his mother. And his father was away on some daily journey across the blue spaces, but that his mother was at home, and he would take Scarface to her, and she would give him something to eat. It was a very large lodge that Early Riser led Scarface into and furnished with belongings of his occupants. Nightlight, sitting upon her couch of fine furs, greeted him kindly, gave him food, and asked him whence he came, and for what reason he had journeyed so far from his people. He told her of his great trouble, his desire to be rid of his scar so that he could marry the beautiful girl of his tribe. And she told him that patience was the virtue, and that it might be done. But when Sun was able to return from his daily travel, she feared that he might be angry if he found Scarface in his lodge. So she hid the youth under one of her white buffalo robes. Man cannot with impunity look upon the sun direct. It will blind you. Sun returned, but instead of entering the lodge, he stopped at the doorway and said, "I smell a human being." Sun entered the lodge and went to his couch and sat down, spoke to Scarface, who had come out from under the robe, looking away. And then he said, "I am glad that you are here with us. Remain with us. I am glad for the sake of my son, because you are his friend. I sense he needs a friend, and it can be a human being. He often becomes lonely, so your presence will be good for him." So that man is a twin. On the following day, after Sun started out on his trail again across the blue, Nightlight said to Scarface, "As you are now my son, go here and there upon this island. There is one thing I want you to do. Never let my son here go near a gathering of big birds that have long and sharp bills, for they are very dangerous. They have killed my other sons that I had before this one. Each one was killed in his turn, and now I have this one. You are to be his protector, to save Early Riser from the birds with the sharp bills." Scarface promised to do that. Several days later, as the two were at an end of the island of the sun, they saw a gathering of birds in the water, close into shore, and Early Riser said to Scarface, "There they are, the bad birds that killed the children my mother bore before me. Let us fight them." "You must not go near them," said Scarface. "I promised your mother to keep you away from them." But Early Riser would not listen, and as the other sons before him did, he ran towards the birds, picked up the stick, and then, remember in the dream, had the urge to hit and strike. Early Riser also has the same mythic configuration. He wants to avenge himself upon the birds. They call forth this action from him. So the birds then rose and came angrily toward Early Riser to kill him, as they had killed all the sons before. But they never got to him. For Scarface, who was immune to that horizon of complication, little as he was, human as he was able to intersperse himself. And with his spear and his mobility, he killed all the birds, and Early Riser was saved. They took home with them the heads of the birds, showed them to Nightlight, and Early Riser told her that Scarface had killed all the bad ones. Then her heart was glad. She hugged Scarface and said that he had become a real son to her. And when Sun returned, she then told him how Scarface had saved the remaining son from the long-billed stabbers. And Sun was greatly pleased too. He said that Scarface had done a great favor to him, that he would never forget it, and he offered to do anything in return for Scar. The young man then said, "Please relieve me of this disfiguration. Make my skin smooth and full and wholesome. Return me to health. There is a beautiful girl of my tribe that I want and will have me for her man if I am made whole." "I will remove it," said the sun, and he rubbed a black medicine upon the scarred cheek and then rubbed it off, and there remained no trace of the deep scar. He was pleased with this, that he had done for the poor one. So were Nightlight and Early Riser. But that was not all that Sun did for the young man. First saying that he was the chief, ruler of the above people, and of the earth and all life upon it, he then instructed Scarface just how he and his kind should worship him, so they might have long and prosperous life, and that Scarface might take the healing ritual back to earth with him and present it and teach it to his people, so that Scarface, having won the gift of healing and its way by his courage from the sun, he would take that back and teach the people. And at last, when he had finished, he led Scarface out a little way from the lodge, pointed out to him a long white trail, and told him to follow it, and he would soon be home again with his people. And so Scarface returned. And this is one of the great myths, one of the two, that form the understanding behind the Sundance. The second one concerns a woman. First a man, then a woman. The tail feathers woman myth then is as follows. After Scarface, there was one other of our ancestors who was with the above ones in their island home, one named Tail Feathers, young and very beautiful. Many of the young men of the tribe wanted to marry her, but one after another she refused them all. And going very early one day for water from her parents' lodge, she saw Morning Star, still bright and shining, and said, "How beautiful you are. I would like to be your woman." One day later on, when she went out for wood for the lodge fire, a handsome young man suddenly came and stood before her and said, "Here I am. I have come for you." "Come for me? What do you mean? I don't know you." And then he said, "I am Morning Star. You said you would like to be my woman, so I have come to take you to my home." The girl looked at him more closely. He was the most handsome young man that she had ever seen. Tall he was, slender, and his clothing of soft, tanned hide. It was embroidered with bright-colored quill work and pleasing figures and sacred symbols, and fringed with many white weasel skins. She believed that he was telling her the truth, that he really was Morning Star. She had idly said that she would like to marry him, but now she was eager for it and said so, and said it without shame or fear. And at that, Morning Star took a long yellow plume from his hair and stuck it upright in her hair, gave her a branch of juniper from which trailed 2 spider webs. He told her the upper web, how to hold the upper web and place her feet upon the lower one, and then shut her eyes. And a little later, he told her to open her eyes. She did so and was surprised. She was standing with him before a beautiful lodge, and he told her that it was the lodge of Sun, his father, and Nightlight, his mother. This is the same person, early riser and morning star. They entered the lodge, and Nightlight, there resting from her night's travel, was pleased that this woman had married her son, and she gave her at once some of her own beautiful clothing and handed her a digging stick, saying that in her spare time she should dig wild turnips for the lodge. But she must be careful that she did not dig up a very large turnip that she might see at no great distance from the lodge. Well, she came home. The son came home from his daily journeys across the blue. He was also glad that Morningstar had taken a wife, and he was very kind to Tailfeather's woman. Talked to her about her people, told her various things that they should do to honor him, to obtain his help in various ways. But when once out digging for turnips for the lodge, for the family ate them frequently, Tailfeather's woman often stopped and looked at the one that Nightlight had mentioned. It was very large, larger than a person's body or perfect shape. It would of itself be enough for the family for several days. She was tempted to dig it up, but always resisted and went on. There came a day, though, pausing again to admire the big turnip, she wanted more than ever to dig it up. You see, it calls out to us to respond. The polarities want their energy fed. She resisted, but she vowed to herself that she must someday dig it up. And the next day, she came in the big turnip again, more insistently, calling to her. So, saying, I must not, she took her digging stick and anyway did, began to dig it. She could only push her digging stick in deeper and deeper and then bear down upon it, and then up came the turnip and rolled off a little ways. The woman looked into the hole which was left, and there was no bottom to it. She could see clear through it a far, long, long, long way. And far below, she could see the earth from where she had come. Its plains, its mountains, the lakes and streams, even the lodges of her people. She sat down at the edge of the hole. She looked down for a very, very long time, looked at the camp of her people, and then became very sad. Even though she loved Morningstar, she also loved her parents. She loved her people. She longed to return to them, just for a visit, she thought. She went back to the lodge, and Morningstar, looking up as she entered, said, "You have dug up that which is forbidden. You have dug up the big turnip." Said Nightlight, "This is bad. I told you not to dig that one out." The two did not speak to her again that day, and she did nothing but sit on her couch and cry, increasingly longing to return to her people, to the earth. The son came home, went to his couch and sat down, and looked sharply at the young woman and said, "Something is wrong with you. What is the trouble?" Said Nightlight, "She has dug up the big forbidden turnip." "Is that so?" Son cried, and then to the digger, "Why did you do it?" And she said, "I couldn't help it. Something kept urging me to dig it up, and then I looked down through the hole from which it rolled, and I saw my country and my people, and I want to go to them. I want to go back." "Go you shall," the son said. No, I love her. I don't want her to go," said Morningstar. It is a great mistake that she made digging up that turnip. But there was nothing more for Morningstar to say. The son had made up his mind. So Nightlight gave her a headdress that should be worn only by women of pure life, and gave her the sacred digging stick. And then Morningstar took her to the big turnip hole, tied a spider web under her arms, and with it lowered her down to earth, close to the camp of her people. And she went at once to the lodge of her parents, and they were glad to see her, and so she brought the offerings back from Nightlight, from the moon. So that Scarface and Tail Feathers woman bring the rituals of the sun and the moon back to the people. One through courage and one through temptation. And the two together, when brought into polar positioning within a context of understanding, resolve each other and permit a universal flow to obtain again. And so it is that the summer solstice celebration is always an occasion, a celebration, a ceremony for universal resolution, which must be won by two elements together. One, courage, and two, a self-sacrificing sense. And the courage and self-sacrificing come together. And in the sun mysteries, always it is this heroic willingness to participate in the mystical resolving of life at the expense of oneself that gives the veracity and the efficacy to the summer solstice ceremonies. Whether it's under the great trilithons or whether it's in the Sundance Lodge, the one truth behind it remains consistent. Well, I have tapped the old bardic capacities, I hope, and after a short break, I will read you an original bardic expression for the solstice, entitled Los Angeles Matrix Sutra. Let's have a little break, and then we'll have this. A sort of a testing ground of courage to accept a certain challenge of sacrifice is, as you have seen, traditional, and a central part of the integrated understanding of the traditions. And in keeping with my particular part for 8 years now, I have always tried to choose the most difficult theme that I could think of and to write original work upon that theme as a summer solstice Sundance offering. Last year was the long poetic structure based on the Sundance itself. This year, in meditating upon what was to be the summer solstice poem, I was finding myself walking incessantly in various areas of Los Angeles and feeling, finally, that the city that we find ourselves in, very mysteriously, almost like the old ancient Alexandria, to be the greatest crisscross of traditions of the contemporary world and the most difficult to bring into any kind of focus or unity or expression. And so I thought I would present my spirit with this challenge of how to encircle Los Angeles in one integration. And I found that none of the old traditional ways work except one, the way in which the Venerable Bard Chaucer chose to describe a journey by simply giving us the tales of the pilgrims, of the travelers, and thus by our hearing the succession of the people and their tales to intuit the motion of the whole. And so this work is written with that basic traditional structure in mind. Chaucer, of course, being a wine merchant for the king, used to read not only publicly in England, but in France and in Italy. And I think I recall seeing someone say that he often had a red velvet cape, which I don't possess. So I have worn as flamboyant apparel as my nature allows. The actual works of the poem, some sections were written as long ago as 7 years and had no place to be except in the proverbial drawer. And at one period, About a month ago, I spent 4 days continuously with no other person except my daughter, who is 8 years old. And in her charming play, I perceived a sense of rhythm and intuition, which enabled the poem to emerge. And so I've given it this dedication because it is true to its genesis. For Nokomis, my daughter, whose kindly spirit made the song, whose deep interval this poem is. There are 7 sections to the work. Each section posits itself as a direction, as a movement. And twice in the poem, the movement is attended to bring it together into an integrated focus. The first movement simply bears the title, Om Ah Ra, 3 primordial symbols in phonetics, which seem to be the origins of most speech patterns worldwide, and also have become sacred symbols to many peoples throughout history for their efficacy of expression, for the fullness or totality of all. So the first section, beginning this language, Om Ah Ra. The second section is a movement called Pyramid Dhyana Vector. Vector simply a direction, and Pyramid Dhyana Vector. Then an attempt to bring those 2 motions together, the Om Ah Ra and the Pyramid Dhyana. Dhyana is the Sanskrit word for meditation. Pyramid Dhyana Vector. To bring them together, I call the third section Gnostic Tao Tensor. These are descriptions from tensor mathematics, where vectors and tensors form a unified matrix expression. So Gnostic Tao Tensor. Then we start off on a new direction, that having been a somewhat incomplete resolution, incomplete tensor. The next vector is called science fiction vector. It's a very prominent aspect of the Los Angeles of our time. And the second motion is entitled Wen Zhen Qing. And Wen Zhen is the Chinese literary tradition. Wen is the art of writing, Zhen of human-heartedness, Qing meaning book. So Wen Zhen Qing is a traditional, learned Chinese method of describing serious literature as a tradition. Then I put a third movement in, another vector entitled Urban Dharma Vector. And then the second tensor, trying to bring it together again after the first attempt of almost making it. And the final 7th section is called Bodhisattva Tensor. And hopefully the work will at that time, with all of the various movements and attempts at integration, will have been brought into some reasonable focus. Focus meaning not a knot, but a bowl, or at least a portal through which understanding might flow. So here's the work. The entire work bears the title Los Angeles Matrix Sutra. The muse for these sorts of things, if you're classically oriented, is Calliope. And so a homage to Calliope, her graciousness, her profundity. The first section, Om Ah Ra. In a newer Alexandria, another Egypt, against the old desert, glossy twists of life spiral into that eternity again. Time flies. Glints of love, lights of life turned forth before the newest age, the oldest pattern. Similar arcs, familiar degrees, spin. Inner sight. Om, thus have I heard. Recently, a certain fine fire in his voice said, there will be, according to the law, living, great space feeling. Los Angeles, the river basin broad as a hand spread 33 degrees, pushed by America to greet the Pacific Ocean. Hail, Grand Spirit. The great Pacific civilization manifested once by the elder Indian spirits sailing, twice by Buddhist missionary monks touring, 3 by ourselves in 20th century LA. O great thrice born Sun Ra, whose fine fire mask lights the desert, whose ocean gloss moves the world breast, heaves the deep rhythm, pace our spirit. Om Ra. Ah, the voice records these final vibrations in the sunny air, in the shunyata mind. The great Vajrayana mantra, Om Ra Patsa Nadi, echoes in the largest crystal, lightning in the city of angels. Om Ra. Ah, this clarion language to the bright winged eye spirit of old Horace freed. Om. Krishnamurti, firmly seated in the plain chair, spoke in the great spirit pace, intervals beyond the words said. The speaker questions intelligence. Does the hearer know that known thus he is, gone beyond the response once said? Ra. Manly Palmer Hall sat relaxed, huge and eloquent, special emphasis upon the universal plan. Thus have I heard and said again, primally and focally, a presence in the pause, completely gone beyond names. Om Ra. The old protective talisman chant, our Prajna Paramitra verse, gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhisvaha, gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond enlightenment. Hail. The second part is pyramid dhyana vector. Hotep, an entity manifest to call, beautiful starships at deep nighttime before Mulholland Fountain's rainbow waters, who used to, as a child, roll the bright green snake hooped tail and mouth along home afternoons, whose deep resonant voice narrated mystical poems among floating flute notes. Hotep's richest voice, bright black eyes, orchestrating intergalactic contact for people out at Joshua Tree Monument. This is your bright blue star. Take care of her. Love her. She is alive, and you can feel snake lightning vibrations play. I was a priest of Amun-Ra when Kephren sat beside Cheops. Such energies condensed into geometry. Zenith blue star vibrations play. Piyananda, gentle monk of Sri Lanka, boiling curry rice inside Temple Bell Garden, saffron cloak stirring, dark-armed genesis of old nutrition, simple distance drawn, teacher of Pali to America, sweet talking, tradition, full of the gentle glide of serving fresh tree and basic rice in Los Angeles. Bringer of the Vihara, clean smile and wide eyes, a teacher of the 26th century in Los Angeles, rice and sutras by the freeways. And the Vihara, an old house bought from a Black Baptist congregation on Crenshaw, preachers and Sangha, bow ties and Buddhas, Amen and Om. The third part, Gnostic Tao Tensor. Stephen Heller, noble bishop, sacred to the first, secret to the last. An old Alexandrian refinedness within, a Hollywood persona, cape and grin without, in fellowship with the Abraxas ring and certain Transylvanian ancestors of mine, traveler of the infinity royal road tarot and penetrator, inheritor of the occult Jung, envisioned Los Angeles as a reincarnation of classical Alexandria, as I did too. From the parapets of the observatory, looking south to the sea, like ancient times, long lines of dusky lights radiate there, past the temples and towers to the ports. Coptic chants interweave the massive din. Ciphered symbols clinch an oceanic mystery. A single prelate held the long lineage true, and passing real wafers, real wine, well known. Kai Di named me roll with the Tao, and in his annual I Ching Book of Days, calendar, and self-monitoring almanac, Los Angeles style man, his energy indicated not only of yang and yin, but of wu. Polarities can hypnotize the new familiarity, those space cowboys waiting for the final surprise. Yet the rising yin has always a yang setting, and fullness opens out. Kai's massive gravity specifically grounds the hectic flight of wingless corporate hoppers. There in the 11th wing, a complete wave of natural peace with a creative hand signals an elemental friendship, Bagua style. D's the true judge of the haunted monastery, which is the so-called spiritual movement touted in our time to the tune of millions. He says, the real Shen rolls with the Tao. The fourth section is entitled Science Fiction Vector. Theodore Sturgeon, charming wizard, writes of dreaming jewels and the golden helix with a touch of strange and more than human, or e pluribus unicorn, a new American motto which means ask the next question, entity. Onwards and upwards spiral, fantasy, envision, a neurotechnical appliance plugged into vast, unknown ranges of energy, obverse, transfixed, until the long, glistening toil of coil sends out the ultimate supernaturalness of us. Crouched, nude with pipe and gray beard, green visor, typewriter humming great tunes of the infinite, the forest elf sage sings the songs Odysseus really loved to hear, the ultimate natural superness in us. A.E. Van Vogt brought back the vision of the space beagle from our future. 1,000 men hurled from arm to arm of our galaxy and then further out. A new origin of species foreshadows the hero with his second 1,000 faces, ready to express the adventures, astounding story indeed, of the unknown, plunged abyss, pure space, and brought forth the vision of null A, worlds and players and more, of doubling mind and widening stage and building pace, all to discover the final face, still man. And lo, man's final face is there, in his languages, and their style is form for him. So 200 are spoken here. Thus Van produced a 200 course. Kindly, kingly gentlemen, clear, light writing, high above Beechwood Canyon. Ancient Chinese lounge enthroned, and stars above, stars below, here in Hollywood, carving literary dragons. The next section is entitled Wen Jian Qing. Cai Shu, my late mentor, always said, poetry styles the age, and for each age, a great city springs up, like Chang'an for Tufu in the Tang, to complete, inform, from dragon to man, the rule of heaven. Kingliness without, sageliness within, yet complement, not polarity within the movement, even if, as with Tufu, splendor desiccates in one's own time, the poet especially brings, in that full style, the poetry special wrought. We walked once amid the great campus riots, thousands flailing, thousands screaming, thousands running, while we walked, and yet talked of Tufu, of Wen Yitu, who, when mentor to Caillou, had been machine gunned in Nanking years ago. We talked long afternoons over precious scrolls, sipping tea Kuan Yin hot, late autumn sun shining, landscapes of Ma Yuan or Li Sheng, another long lesson in patient civilization, another long session in Chinese revelation. Orient Li doffs his hat and coat and smiling orders up 7 courses while rolling up his sleeves, then quotes Li Po verbatim, ancient style. While having rolled up his sleeves, contemporary student with Zhou Enlai years ago in Paris, yet confirms poetry as the very tree of life. The Li family has the best poets. Li Po's cinnabar, Li Shangyin's orange, Professor Li's the painting master, mixing 1,000 autumn colors well. Let's bring the tree to Los Angeles, filled with spirit birds of song, clustered with rare fruits of life, all abloom in bright sky blue space. The 6th section is Urban Dharma Vector. Thich Thien Nan's father self-emulated in Vietnam, in Saigon, in front of all the professors and people and whose silent monks sent back to us here a peace bell cast from collected guns. We oiled that wooden shrine all summer, and then came the flooding full. The refugees, the trucks, the tears. Long tables crowded with reaching hands, food shoveled forth to stem the tide. Big city Buddhists seem so busy, I've heard some people say, getting houses, roasting food, wonder why, some still say. Los Angeles holds in her broad grasp the hungry ends of Vietnam, both the Preta and those scared-eyed kids. Our Lady of all the real angels, of all the real Liebestowed, yet to be sung, of this city and of this country, of golden-winged angels with no dreams. Fra Amariano, my Korean Dharma brother, world-class spirit, who chose the hard place, the city most unlikely, the hell-bent for leather commercial boys and their kind. I mean Dallas. Asia and Texas, Dharma and Dallas, oh dear brother. But the crass nose of the North Texas plain are better than the innuendos now played in temples and ashrams in Los Angeles. The Dharma wears no special color, nor even a robe anymore, anywhere near our here. The Venerable Walpole Raoula spoke it fresh from Oxford to rows of assembled monks, black, orange, red, yellow, robed, gathered, with his Barry Fitzgerald grin, surprising. Said the Dharma has no robe in Los Angeles. My Dharma brother drives his cars or firmly sets his thongs before his classic robe of crimson sunset, turning the wheel in a new way and walking with Ashoka in Los Angeles. The final section is entitled Bodhisattva Tensor. Karma Tinley Rinpoche wore cowboy boots, teaching Tibetan language, and the lineage of 16 Karmapas set there at my place, Bodhisattva, named for those noble path beings, foregoing their own emancipation before other beings all go first, enjoying the 6 paramitas equally before all, Sila, Dana, Virya, and Kshanti, Dhyana, Prajna, enjoying all 6 equally before the all. Karma Tinley exhibited fierce eyes, he said, and so hid them often in Los Angeles haze, a way of semi-doing we all have mastered. Once, after a day together, after fresh fruit, upstairs from the waiting multitude, he stepped in front of the sun-blazed, no-faced, blessed me, teaching the 6 paramitas equally before all, Sila, Dana, Virya, and Kshanti, Dhyana, Prajna, coursing in the well-gone wisdom. Subhadra was the latest to direct teachings in 3 or more dimensions, where curvature properties must be discussed by multiple magnitudes, and argued descriptively knowledge of the whole curvature tensor. Good evening, dear Bodhisattvas. Bless that senior in Los Angeles. Best that he, a native, as scenarios always seem to be, in a land of scripts and scenes and songs, in a world of indefinite play, movement by a native teacher curves straight through. Good evening, dear Subhadra. A poem. The mysterious exchange of selves again, according to the old high Dharma again, coursing in the well-gone wisdom. The final section, reading Shantideva in Los Angeles. Full moon, brightest amid the starry spaces, full bloom, deep spaced blue, clear airy night, red sparkled Mars and bluish spangled Orion rising. This personal stands forth, a prow of being, full growing into tonight as deep space blue. This enormous city, distance ruffled thunders and rushings, an ocean of starry spaciousness, is one standing forth the measureless neutral of it all, no telling, in the amphitheater night only the whitest full moon, quiet with the stars. In the darkened study, Shanti Deva's book, brown cloth covered, closed, blessed Bodhisattva's poem, a deeper shadow placed within the darkest space. This personal stands and moves out a sliding doorway, moving out clearly through the universe, home. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha. Well, thank you very much. I hope you'll stay for our film this afternoon.